I recently started a series on my channel talking about my best and worst fragrances from different brands. If you haven't caught that, I'll link the first episode up here. In that first episode, we covered Tom Ford, and I shared my best and worst fragrances from Tom Ford. Now, if you watched that video, you'll know that I don't actually mean best and worst. I'm talking about most worn and least worn. I was focusing on the numbers because I like to track my fragrance wearings every single day so I can keep myself honest with my collection and with my content. Now, I love the brand of Tom Ford. I actually never intended to be a Tom Ford collector, and I'm only that marginally, I would say, because I'm not actively seeking new Tom Ford fragrances all the time. But I've amassed quite a collection beyond what I would have ever expected because Tom Ford always seemed a little bit outside of my taste and my budget. But here we are, many years into this hobby, and I now have a collection of over a dozen Tom Ford fragrances and counting. And I decided to put together a little video ranking all of my Tom Ford fragrances, but we are going selfishly here. I'm not doing it functionally, which is based on the numbers. I'm doing it purely based on taste, based on what smells the best to me. Even if I don't wear it all that much, we're not even worried about that. So if you want to know my taste and Tom Ford, at least with what I currently have, then let's jump right into it. We're going to start with my worst. And to be clear, this is all relative. I don't dislike any of these fragrances because I wouldn't have them if I did. But the fragrances at the bottom of the list, you can surmise, don't really suit my taste and my preferences quite as strongly as the ones at the top. So this first one up here happens to be my least worn Tom Ford fragrance, and it's Shanghai Lily. From what I understand, this is discontinued. It's hard to find out there. I don't recommend you run out and try to grab it as soon as you can. If you are a fan of white floral fragrances with edge, then this is one to consider checking out. It's a spicy, woody, slightly powdery white floral, a little bit of a natural floral sweetness in there. Very opulent, very posh smelling. It smells expensive, it smells luxurious. It's perfectly unisex, although some may find it a little bit feminine just because it's floral. That's okay. While I do appreciate the scent, I do love the uniqueness of it. It doesn't really suit my personality on most days. I don't reach for it that much. I've literally worn it like one time, but I do want to try to give it some more wearings, especially this coming fall, which I think is the best time of the year to wear it. So that's Shanghai Lily at the bottom of the list, my least favorite, so to speak. Up next is one that I honestly was obsessed with. When I first tried it, I got a sample of it. Right away, I had to go scouring the internet for a bottle. It actually took me some time to find a bottle for a good price because it is discontinued. And I did finally find a steal on a bottle. And then, as naturally happens, I kind of fell out with it. I do still really like it. I plan to give it some wearing this summer because this is the time to wear it. But there's others that have caught my attention since. This is Mandarino di Amalfi Aqua. A beautiful, fresh, almost aquatic floral fragrance. Very, very citrusy, very floral, but in a clean way. There's a little bit of mint in here to really freshen it up. And it dries in kind of a warm, ambery sort of way. There's even allegedly some animalic notes in here, which I don't get at all. Ultimately, it is classy, but it's fun. It's bright, it's inviting, it's uplifting, it's very fresh, perfect for a vacation or just a casual day out. I love the juiciness of the mandarin orange. It's so sparkling, and I love the function of this scent. This is maybe a 3 or 4 hour fragrance for me. That's all I would really need it for because it'll dissipate as we move into the later part of the day. I'll probably shower and then I'll put on something else. And I think that's totally fine. Every type of performance has its function, as I like to say. But that is Mandarino di Amalfi Aqua. Let me know if you've tried it. Now, some of you might be surprised to see this fragrance so low. Again, this is all relative. I do enjoy this fragrance. It doesn't move me quite like it seems to move a lot of people. And I think there's maybe a lot of people that love it so much because it gets them positive feedback. If it didn't get them positive feedback, the question is, would they be talking about it? Ombre Leather. I know some of you will ask, Justin, have you tried the Parfum version? And my answer will be yes. I have tried the Parfum version, not on my skin, only on paper in a store, and not that long ago. I did like it, not enough to want to get a bottle of it because they smell pretty similar. They would serve the same function for me. so I don't need them both, but I do appreciate it as a pretty solid flanker. This is sweet, smooth suede leather, almost like a fruity raspberry feel. It does smell very, very similar to Tuscan Leather to me. It actually confuses me because they kind of fill the same bracket. This is maybe a little bit easier to wear, a little less brash, a little bit softer and smooth around the edges, but kind of like a tamed down version of that scent profile. So I see the use here. I see people who didn't really dig Tuscan Leather will have a better chance of enjoying this one. I do like to wear it on a night out in the fall, maybe wearing a black leather jacket. I think it works perfectly for that, but there's just more interesting fragrances from the house. So Ombre Leather, good stuff. It's super hyped. I understand why, but there's others I prefer. Ombre Leather. Speaking of Tuscan Leather, I do prefer Tuscan Leather over Ombre Leather. Not by a whole lot, but I do really enjoy this scent. This is the OG for me, and what I think I really enjoy about Tuscan Leather is that it reminds me of the earlier parts of my fragrance journey, especially here on YouTube. It was the first actual dedicated review to one fragrance that I ever did on this channel. If you missed a video that I made of me in 2023 reacting to that video, check it out. It is hilarious. And yes, this takes me back to that time. At that time, I could appreciate Tuscan Leather, but I could not see myself wearing it. And now I can see myself wearing this. I wore this a little bit this past winter, really enjoyed it. I'll do some more this fall and winter. This is luxurious stuff. Slightly more brash, dry, spicy, raspberry and leather. It does have this old brown leather feel to it. Something that's a little bit harsh to smell up close, to be honest, but I enjoy it. And it smells incredible and even better in the air. It is a very particular scent for me, very specific, which I appreciate, but as a result, I don't reach for it all the time. It's not the most versatile fragrance. I have to be in the mood for a leather this brash. But that is Tom Ford Tuscan Leather, an absolute classic, one of the few fragrances left in the original releases from the private blend line. There's a reason it's still on the shelves. Tom Ford is one of those brands that is so victim to discontinuation. It is kind of alarming how many fragrances they just kick to the curb. Although one thing I appreciate about them is, unlike some other brands, they do bring fragrances back in new ways. You see it here and there with other brands, but Tom Ford is known for this because they have different collections. If something doesn't work in the private blend line, they can bump it down to the signature line for a cheaper price and still get that scent profile out into the world. I really appreciate that. This one has been kicked to the curb. I don't know if it has any chance of coming back. I'd like to see it because I'd love for more of you to try this, but this is a classic, Plum Japonais. As per the name, plum is at the forefront here. Sweet and fruity, but it's dark. There is not really any brightness here, not like a fresh fruity plum. This is a dark plum in woods, dry woods and spices, almost a bit of a resinous feel, maybe even like an incense vibe in there. It's one of the most unique plum fragrances I've ever come across. It is also very specific, so I understand why it didn't really catch on, because not everyone's gonna dig this. This is definitely a niche fragrance, even though it is from a designer brand. I do believe Tom Ford makes a lot of niche fragrances, even though they are a mainstream designer. That's a topic for another time that I've actually covered already. But Special Juice, along with many of the other fragrances from this brand, again, unfortunate that it is discontinued. If you can find a sample, get a sample. This is one of those fragrances that I feel like is a must experience for most of you guys who appreciate more challenging and interesting yet alluring fragrances. That is Plum Japonais. Here's a classic example of a fragrance that when I first smelled it, I was not ready. I could not handle it. In fact, I hated this fragrance when I first smelled it, and I ended up reviewing it several years ago. That review is still up and it's not going anywhere. It's an accurate snapshot of how I felt about this fragrance at that time, but suffice to say, I feel a whole lot differently about it today. Noir Eau de Parfum. I do believe this is also discontinued. And what I didn't like about this fragrance was that it was powdery and bitter with a little bit of a rosy sweetness, and I couldn't do it. It smelled old and weird. I wasn't about it. But today, I think this is kind of a masterpiece. It does have a little bit of a vintage flair, something like Habit Rouge from Guerlain. I get that vibe. This soft, slightly sweet, jammy, powdery rose with earthy patchouli. A lot of patchouli, you gotta like patchouli, but it's soft. Its resonance is relatively close to the skin, doesn't scream out. It makes it super elegant, which I think works in its favor because this type of scent profile would be obnoxious if it was any stronger than this. A perfect example of a beautiful eau de parfum. A little bit gothic, but still very elegant. That is Tom Ford Noir Eau de Parfum. We've got another classic here. This was one of the first fragrances that Tom Ford ever released as a brand, and there's a reason why it's still on shelves today. It is an iconic scent, but it is very particular, a little bit polarizing. If you jive with it, you really jive with it. If you don't like it, you really hate it, but I would still advise coming back to it later. This is Black Orchid, the original Eau de Parfum. Oh man. If you've never smelled this before, at first sniff, this is gonna smell like a woman's fragrance. There is this sweet, chocolatey, floral vibe. It is thick, but there's something kind of funky about it. This earthy funk that is very, very subtle. And I think that edge pushes the needle back towards unisex territory. I think this is utterly intoxicating. I think it's very addictive, but very specific. I'm rarely in the mood for this. I might reach for it in the fall and the winter, only in the evening time. For some people, this is signature worthy. I can see why, but it takes a certain personality to rock this all the time. But I do want to do it justice and wear it more because I don't wear it enough. Black Orchid. We've got to talk about the Parfum version of Black Orchid. This is a perfect fragrance for those guys who may have found the Eau de Parfum version of Black Orchid a little too feminine. They actually kind of beefed it up here. They darkened it up. They made it a little less floral, added a boozy element to it, bumped up some leathery, earthy aspects. It's still sweet, almost chocolatey, but rougher around the edges. The texture here is just more grainy. I love that about this. It's still just as particular. There's no guarantee you're going to enjoy this if you didn't like the original because it still very much smells like the original. The DNA is encapsulated here. It's just treated in a different way. I prefer it just a little bit to the original because I wear it a little bit more comfortably in terms of my personality. But do check out Black Orchid Parfum if you have not yet done so. We have an utter classic. I would not be surprised if this was maybe the best seller from the house to this day, or at least the best seller in the private blend line. We have to talk about Oud Wood. And while I am a little bored with Oud Wood, I really like it and I wear it quite a bit. It's actually pretty functional in my collection. I do have to commend Oud Wood for being a relatively unique scent profile, taking oud, very much westernizing it, taking away the funk and the idea of a fecal element to oud, making it soft, sweet and spicy, and a little bit light. And I think that makes it very approachable for Western audiences. I don't really need to describe it more because you've probably smelled it. I do like it a lot, and I wear it here and there more so than some of the others. That is Oud Wood. Admittedly, this is a fragrance I don't wear as often as Oud Wood, but I find it more interesting. It happens to be the only other 30 milliliter bottle in my collection. These two sit together on the shelf because they are the only ones of the same size and they just look so cute together. This is Oud Minérale, another discontinued gem here. It was discontinued and then they brought it back. That's when I got this bottle. And then I've just heard they discontinued it again. And I know why. I totally understand. This is a rough fragrance. This is not for everyone's pleasure. This is for your pleasure as the wearer. If you like the idea of a dark, seaweedy, smoky, woody aquatic, something that reminds you of being out on the Pacific Ocean during a storm, floating on a piece of driftwood, hanging on for dear life, but somehow enjoying yourself. That's what this reminds me of. Oud Minérale is a statement maker as far as aquatics go. It is a very elegant scent. I would only dress this up and I would wear it in the evening, and it can become way too much if you overspray it. It can get really rancid. So you've been warned. This is one that does a whole lot better enjoyed with subtlety. Oud Minérale. Let me know if you like it. This fragrance was love at first sniff. I did review it when it came out in 2020. This is another example of Tom Ford discontinuing something and then bringing it back with the hopes that more people will try it because it'll be more accessible. This is Beau de Jour. This was a part of a Fougère series that he released in the private blend line. I would imagine that it did not do well in terms of sales. They dropped it, they brought it back. It's more accessible now, and I think it's going to stay there because I think it's doing better than it was before. But this is a classic men's barbershop Fougère. There's that clean, fresh out the barbershop feeling, almost a shaving foam feel from that lavender, very clean. There's a sweet tonka bean coumarin vibe that just adds a bit of this sexy quality to the cleanliness. There's spices, there's a lot of oak moss in here. It does smell vintage and mature. It smells like Zino Davidoff from the 80s. You want that classic masculine smell? This is one to check out. Beau de Jour. Another discontinued gem. Would you believe it? But I have heard that this might be coming back, but I've been hearing that for a year or two now, so I don't know. This is Tobacco Oud. I'll admit, when I first heard about this fragrance while it was still available, I was afraid to try it. Why? For the reason why I was afraid to try anything considered niche until I actually tried it, and that was the fear that I wouldn't like it. I was afraid I wouldn't like it. When I think back on that, I'm like, man, you're not even gonna try it, but you don't actually know. Here we are years later. This was a gift from a dear friend. You know who you are, so thank you so much for gifting this to me before it was completely gone. I will cherish this bottle down to the last drop. Tobacco Oud is, first of all, not as brash as I was expecting it to be. When I finally got my nose on it, I was surprised to find it sweeter than I expected. There's like a smoky, sweet tobacco type of sweetness in here, mixed with some whiskey and some spices and some woods. The oud in here, like other Tom Fords, is not your typical Eastern type of oud. It is more westernized. It is more accessible. It is more of a supporting player, and it's not funky, but it is dry and it is dark. And this is another one that if you overspray it, you will regret it. Get a sample if you can. Tom Ford Tobacco Oud. Finally, at the last two here, this is one that I blind bought it. I don't recommend blind buying, and I definitely don't recommend blind buying this fragrance, but I know some of you already did based on what I've said about it. So those of you who did, I'm glad you like it. If you don't, I warned you. This is Ebene Fumé. This blew me away, but not at first. When I first bought it, I put it on skin. I made a video actually unboxing it, smelled it up close, and I wasn't sold. But it wasn't until I gave it that full wearing where I wasn't bearing my nose into it where I realized this is an incredible fragrance. It's actually quite strong, so watch out for that. But this is fresh and almost metallic at first spray. Violet leaf contributes to that, but it immediately turns into this smoky, spicy, soft, woody Palo Santo. There's a calming quality here while being kind of authoritative and elegant. And there's a little bit of this sweet resinous feel that kind of rounds it out, making it something that's easier to get next to. People really dig sweetness for the most part, especially when it's not overdone. It can add a very approachable quality to a fragrance, and especially done in a resinous way. Vanilla is cool too, gourmands are great, but resins, now you're dealing with sexy, mysterious territory. That is Ebene Fumé. And the final fragrance, I know a lot of you will probably already know what this is. This has swept my attention from first sniff. So I want to thank you, Malcolm, for sending me this fragrance, gifting it to me so generously. It's become my favorite. It has been since I first tried it. Fougère d'Argent, one of my favorite fougères right now. This takes all the classic elements and it modernizes it. It is fresh, spicy, it is sweet, but it is heavier on spicy sweetness. There is this honestly not super natural smelling element to the scent that makes it very alluring, almost like this cozy, warm woodiness. The scent overall is kind of simple for a fougère, but it comes across as something unlike most fougères I've tried. It doesn't smell like your typical out the barbershop kind of cleanliness. There is a sexiness here. There is this allure, even though it is sophisticated and grown man status, as I would say. It's something that people want to get next to. Yeah, you can wear it to the office, but you could also wear it on a date night and just kill the game completely. Fougère d'Argent. I want to know what you think of these fragrances. If you've tried them, everything will be linked down in the description. Wherever I can find links to try them, you can find it down there. So try what you haven't tried yet. Thank you so much for tuning in. Peace. I'll see you in the next one.